BierTalk. Gespräche über und beim Bier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of our podcast, BierTalk. I'm still in Brazil after more than a week, but now we're sitting together. I'm here with David Anderson, a good friend and beer judge of mine, and we are talking about his beer history. He had a brewery, but we will hear a lot about this in a few moments. So please, David, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Well, hi, listeners. This is David Anderson. I'm from the United States. I live in the state of Wisconsin, and I currently live in a city called La Crosse. Beer history. So me and beer go way back to, I guess I could say home brewing back in 1992, and started to make some good beers, and people liked my beer and said, wow, you should open a brewery. So I took that and ran with it and created a concept I called the Brewfarm, to be able to brew beer on a farm or a rural spot, and kind of in the image of a Belgian farmhouse style brewery. Back in 1995 I started, so.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Long time before and long time after, so let's see. And how did it all start? So when you grew up, when did you had your first contact to beer? Or?
Oh boy. So I had some cousins. I think the first time I ever had a beer was when I was probably 8 or 9, and up at the cousin's farm, and they said, here, try this. And it was a beer called Falstaff. It was a classic old, plain old American lager. And I think I went to my first keg party when I was 12, and kind of went from there. And then, like I said, discovered homebrewing in 1992. And from there, it went to a little more formal after I decided I wanted to open my own brewery in 1995. Started writing my business plan, and then realized that being a home brewer was just a good step. It was an introduction to brewing, but it was nowhere near the necessary information and experiences to brew commercially. So in 1996, early 1996, I went to the Siebel Institute in Chicago, where I had some training, both classroom and some hands-on training, which helped start the process to be a commercial brewer. And soon after that, I still pursued ideas and the whole, taking an idea and making it reality, which is a million steps in between and thousands of details. So I started brewing for a brewery called Ambleside Brewing in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1997. Brewed with them for the year and a half they existed. They went out of business after a year and a half, which was very informative on many things, what not to do, as opposed even to what to do. I found what not to do being almost more important as I put mine together than what to do. So
yeah, that's an important learning, I think, to see better what you don't do next time, or
exactly.
You do it your own time.
Because I let somebody else make $1 million mistakes is always a preferential.
but maybe let's see, how did the beer market look in the early 19s, and then later on when you started? What was in the US at this time going on?
Very good question. I believe when I started in 95, there were 300 breweries, give or take, and now there's more than 9,000. So it was kind of the Wild West time. There was a lot of breweries that had been going for a long time, like Anchor and Sierra Nevada, and things that had been going since the 80s. So there was definitely brewers to look to get inspiration on how to start and grow and to be good craft brewers. And it was one of those times where you pretty much knew almost everybody in the business. It was a very friendly and collegial atmosphere, and everybody's helping everybody else. And because the goal was creating that delicious, clean, tasty, interesting glass of beer at the end of the day.
So you met all these legends we say today?
I did, yeah. And then it started because the first time I got into the beer judging, I started beer judging soon after I completed the Siebel, because there was sensory training at Siebel. So I was like, oh wow, I can definitely be able to take a beer and pick it apart as far as the visual, the aromas, the flavors, the mouthfeel, the beer experience, as I call it, to be able to do that. So I started judging homebrew in 1996 in the Minneapolis area where I was living, and soon I applied for judging at the Great American Beer Festival, and at that time there wasn't that many beers entered and there wasn't that many judges, so I was on I think it was about a 2-year or 3-year wait list, and finally got to judge at the Great American Beer Festival in 2005.
Ooh.
So that was my first big commercial endeavor, and that's where I met a lot of the legends, because they were, they'd been doing it for a while, and because the GABF was probably about 10, 12 years before that, I think they started. But and then my first international experience was Birra dell'Anno. I think it was 2006 or 7, and that's when it was in Milano, and that was such a fantastic experience to be able to judge internationally, and that kind of set the tone, or I guess the idea that I'd really like to travel the world, drink beer, and write it off on my taxes.
Did this traveling for judging also influence your brewing?
Very much so, and because I get access and get to experience beers I'd never be able to experience, because I go to where we're at in Brazil, or I was in Japan prior to coming here, and I was in Italy earlier this year, and I was in Germany for European Beer Star this year. So going to the source and being able to not only just experience the beers at the festival, visiting all the breweries that I can possibly, going to the store and just finding a random beer, it's like, what is this, and trying it and being able to, but yeah, it was very fruitful for my brewing, which we'll get to soon. That was inspirational, or just would give you a kernel of an idea. It's like, wow, somebody put yuzu fruit in a beer, and it's like, wow, that's really an interesting idea. I could make a beer with X, Y, and Z and yuzu fruit.
So that might be maybe a good advice for a brewer to be also a beer judge.
I highly recommend it. I really believe that it not only sharpens your sensory to be able to understand your own beers, but to be able to just be intelligent, I guess, or just be smart about what's going on with your beers, and be able to course correct, because I know a lot of brewers are very poor at sensory, which seems backwards, because if you're drinking your own beer and you can't tell if there's a problem, that's a big problem.
Yeah. If we look back to the 90s, when I did research for my books, I read the idea that you had America more or less separated in two parts in terms of beer, or general in terms of society in the 70s and 80s, because you had the West Coast with all these crazy people which maybe didn't make it in the East Coast, but then they went there and made it more easy and be creative, and some of them made the computer stuff and some of them made the beer stuff. And on the other side you had the East Coast people, hardworking class, and all these people with also their beers, and Wisconsin is more or less in between. So
yep.
did you also discover that and did you have connection to the West Coast or to the East Coast, or where did you get inspiration?
It's a good question. There was an East Coast West Coast divide, and the beer styles, if they said American IPA back in the mid 90s, a West Coast IPA would be very different from an East Coast IPA, and there's still some differentiation between the coasts, but I think as the craft beer market has grown, there's become a little more homogenous, so that East Coast kind of blends a little bit with West Coast. They kind of they have intermingling, so there's definitely a merging of kind of styles when it comes to things of that nature. As far as the Midwest, it's been such a back in the 1800s, many German and Czech immigrants, so there's very heavy lager emphasis in the upper Midwest, and that it took a while for the craft, especially the hop angle of craft beer, to really take hold. You don't want anything too spicy in the Midwest, because that's too much flavor. So that the lagers ruled the day back then.
So when you started, did you have access to the beers from the West Coast and to the raw materials from there, or do you have more local stuff or more lager stuff?
You could get access to the hops. That wasn't too much of a problem. And the Midwest is the grain belt, so the malts were grown in Minnesota and North Dakota. So things were there's a number of large malting facilities in the Midwest, so that was easy to get at. Hops weren't too. They were accessible. You could get the stuff from Hopsteiner and the imported hops were a little bit more difficult, but as the market grew, availability grew with it.
And being a home brewer, it was easy that time to start up, like getting the equipment, getting the raw materials with the recipes, or did you have communities, or how did that come?
A little bit of both. There were the classic, what they call homebrew shop, or local homebrew shop, and they had all the materials. They didn't have a great variety of things. It was pretty limited, and you typically have a pre-made kit or pre-assembled kit, so all the ingredients were there. You just had to have the equipment, and they gave you directions. So it was kind of like making soup at that point, but not quite. I always people think that making beer is the equivalent of making soup, so I use that analogy for what's not making soup. No. It's one of those things where once you start with a pre-made kit, and then you have ideas. I like to cook, so there's a cooking background, so you can take and extrapolate from the existing recipes to like, well, what if I use this ingredient, or what if I change this yeast or these hops, and be able to experiment, and that kind of set the tone for later down the road when I open my own brewery.
So you opened your own brewery, but did you have a normal job before? Some regular thing?
I don't know about normal. My career is that I didn't really have a career. Been in the beer business in many different facets. Once I started putting together my business plan for Dave's Brewfarm in '95, went to Seaville '96. Then I bought some commercial land in the city of Plymouth, Minnesota, where I was going to open up essentially a brew pub. It wasn't really my original vision of brewing on the farm. This was more of a rock bottom type brew pub with 210 seats and 10 barrel brew house and big restaurant. And I chased that for 3 years before, in the late 1990s, the market went south, and nobody wanted to invest in a restaurant at that time. So then I sold the land I bought, which, not knowing what was in the future, but that lump sum that I got from selling the land enabled me to, down the road, build the brew farm.
So what were your customers at this time in the brewery, in the tap room? Before the brew farm, in your first.
They never came to exist. So
you just had the land and
just had the land. I had the land. I had construction plans. I had 2 banks that were ready to write loans, but I needed to raise $750,000 privately. Yeah, it ended up being a $2.1 million project. Yeah, it was big. But the investors were scared to invest in a restaurant. Essentially, it was a restaurant that happened to brew beer. That's truly what a brew pub is. First and foremost, a restaurant that happens to brew beer, not a brewery that happens to have a restaurant. That's typically more American in that regard.
So you could keep your investors and start the new project.
I really didn't have investors. Again, I had everything in place for them, but there was nothing there. But I owned the land, and the land had increased in value significantly in the 4 years that I held it. So once I sold that, I had a nice lump sum to be able to. And after I sold it, then I went to work for. What did I do? I worked for other distributors. Actually moved from Minnesota I got married, moved out to Massachusetts and started brewing for a brewery called Paper City Brewery in Holyoke, Massachusetts for 2.5 years. I started a beer export company in 2002 called Brewers Alchemy Exports, and showcased beers at the 2002 Great British Beer Festival. I brought a bunch of American beers over. So I had my hands in a lot of different kind of entrepreneurial things, and I went to work for a beer distributor, moved back to St. Paul, Minnesota, and went to work for a beer distributor there. So I was a salesman selling draft accounts in the Minneapolis market. And then finally in 2007, I started looking at land. And in February of 2008, I closed on 35 acres of what would become the brew farm.
Yeah. Before we look to the brew farm, what about your family? Did they support you, your parents or your wife or whatever? Or what did they say if you told them you're going into the beer business?
They were a little skeptical, as I was as well. I suppose it's always good to have a little bit of skepticism. because it's now looking back, I know how difficult and how many, how the deck is stacked against you to be able to, actually create it and be successful. So, they're supportive all the way through, and it's like, well, if this is what you want to do, let's, we'll support you. And so I went forward and, jumped off the the cliff and hoping there was a net below.
Do you have siblings?
Yep, I have siblings. I'm the eldest. I've got a brother who's a piano player, another brother who is a mechanical engineer, and a sister who does marketing.
Okay. Good bunch of people.
Oh yes, very good.
Great.
And they are all very, again, supportive.
Okay, and then you had the idea of the brew farm. Mm-hmm. So that, for me, means you have a farm, mm-hmm. like animals and maybe some crops and also, of course, beer. Mm-hmm. Was the emphasis on more on the farm or more on the beer, or how did that go?
It was definitely beer first. So when the brew farm came together, it was just bare land. It was 35 acres. Not sure what that translated into hectares, but it's a good chunk of land. Beautiful rolling Wisconsin farmland, and it was just the dirt and trees. That was it. So everything that became the brew farm, we had to physically build or somehow manage to create. And broke ground September of 2008. It was built as a live workspace, so the building itself was built into the hillside, and that's where the brewery was. Is 40 feet by 60 feet, so 2,400 square feet. Sorry for all you metric fans out there. And then the living space was above it, about 1,500 square feet of living space.
So the scenery was, you had hills in the back, and then a river or something like that?
No, just there were some natural springs, a pond, so it wasn't really a water feature. Of the 35 acres, 22 were tillable or pasture, and then the balance was woods. And as far as the farm aspect, we planted hops. We had 4 different varieties. I can't remember now. I think one was Fuggles, one was Centennial, Cascade, and Northern Brewer. And for anybody thinking about growing hops, don't.
Yeah. I just was thinking, you need such a lot of knowledge to do all these different things. So did you have people for that, or did you have to learn that on your own, or how did that?
Yes, it was all on my own. At the time I was married, so I had my now ex-wife, but she was very into the growing of things. In fact, we had what's called a community supported agriculture, so she grew crops and sold shares for families outside the city. But yeah, it was just, I had never had employees. I was a solo operator. So yes, doing everything. People would ask, like, so do you grow your own barley and malt it? And I'm like, no, it's just 24 hours in a day. It's just me.
I just wanted to ask, because for me that sounds like a 26-hour day.
It is at least 26, and more. It's one of those things where I've been so involved in it, and it just was kind of a natural thing where there's always stuff to do, and people would ask me, it's like, well, do you have a job outside of this? And then I'd give them the look like, are you kidding me? Do you know what goes on to make that nice clean glass of beer that you're drinking, just to make it look easy? So many details and so much hard work.
And you also had a tap room there?
Yes, we had a tap room. It was kind of tucked into the corner of the brewery space. It wasn't originally planned, but somebody had said, well, you should really consider that. It's good for, marketing directly to your customers. The profit margins are very good for, manufacturing to retail. So you should probably just put in a little tap room. I was like, oh, okay, sure. So we put in a bar. We had 8 different lines that were constantly rotating. And it was pretty minimalist when it came to tap rooms. We put out chairs and tables in the brewery space. So like wintertime, it would be really snug. We could get about 50 or 60 people in there. But during the summertime and spring and fall was outside in the brew farm, and that was fantastic. People would drive from the Twin Cities, 45 minutes, hour one way to come out and spend time at the brew farm.
So people came for beer or also for food?
They brought their own food. It was something that people said, oh yeah, you should have a restaurant and do food. And I was like, no, I don't want to be a restaurant. I want to focus on the beer and the licensing for having a restaurant is much more onerous. It's a lot more rigorous because the health considerations that preparing food. We did sell frozen pizzas, so that was as far as I wanted to go with food. But we encourage people to bring picnics and grills and things like that to be able to enjoy.
But still doesn't sound for me that there's a lot of income generated by that. So
interesting. So when people they'd try my beer and say, "Wow, your beer's really good," and they say, "What's going to happen when you grow?" And I said, "I'm going to grow enough to be sustainable. I'm going to get enough money to cash flow." And that's the whole key, I think, to any business is cash flow and debt management. So those two things to minimize your debt and cash flow enough to pay that debt, and have enough cushion, because it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when something's going to go wrong. So you need to have enough funds in savings to be able to cover those emergencies and those breakages and things that are going to happen.
And you also had your animals, so you sold maybe eggs or
we had chickens and ducks. So we had probably 30 chickens, most of them layers, some meat birds, and then we also had ducks. They were mostly layers. Mostly we had like Pekin ducks and the fantastic to be able to raise your own. A lot of work, but. So that wasn't really so much as an income stream. It was good to have fresh.
And what beers did you make?
Which beers didn't I make? It was a huge variety. I had 2 brewing systems. I had a 7-barrel little 2-vessel system, and then I had a pilot system, which was 10 gallons. So I could experiment, and it was a lot of Belgian-style influence, I guess. So saisons and some of the stronger Trappist area triples, but I also did lagers. I did a lot of things that I just ended up calling Brewfarm style, because they didn't fit into I know styles being a beer judge, but they certainly didn't fit any particular style.
Was there something like an all-time favorite which was always available?
So I ended up, when I first started, I contracted a couple of beers in packages because I didn't have either the money or the space to put it in a canning line or a bottling line. So I had 2 beers. One was called Brewfarm Select, which was a pale 5.5% lager. Had a nice hop balance to it. And the other one was called Matacabras, which is a Spanish wind that is so strong it kills goats. Blows them off the cliff. It's very strong. I know people are like, really? And then in fine print on the label it says, "No goats were harmed in the production of this ale." Just a cover for all the PETA people out there. But those were the 2 pretty much. So the Matacabras was a 8.5%. Had the Trappist yeast strain. It had rye malts, American hops, so it was a very kind of a mix, again, Brewfarm style. And on the label I put a curious ale, because it really, again, didn't fit. People were like, "What is this?" Like, well, it's delicious. But there's, so many different beers. And the tap room was kind of my test room, I guess is the best way to describe it, because I'd put a new beer on. Is it good? Is it thumbs up, thumbs down? And some of the beers would always get chatter. So I had a Scotch ale called Mick Anderson that was typically a fall-time seasonal. I called them seasonal, but because it was 8.5% again. And there's another one called SOB OMG. So
God!
Yeah, it was sour. It was sour orange basil SOB. Then oh my goodness, but it was with a sour orange puree and fresh basil. So it was a summertime. So it's fun to be able to do that. So we grew the basil in our garden. I made other a lot of the flowers and wildflowers. I made a dandelion saison. There was other ones with bee balm. We had planted some grapes. So some cold, hardy grape varieties. There was raspberries that grew wild. So I was able to forage quite a few ingredients and begin to experiment to see, what kind of base beer style would it go with, what kind of yeast would be appropriate to go with it. And usually hopping was always very minimal for stuff like that to showcase the special ingredients.
So that was more or less your showroom, and then you had contracted the successful beers
Yeah.
and you sold that at the stores?
Correct, yes, yeah.
And was that easy? Because I heard with the
No.
3-tier system, it's not so easy to get in shops and stores. And
Wisconsin had law that under 300,000 barrels, which I was very under, you can self-distribute.
oh, okay.
So, but I did work with a distributor to have both throughout Wisconsin, where I did some self-distribution in my small area, and then outstate, I had a distributor who distributed my beers, and then I had a Minnesota distributor cover I was 45 minutes from Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is a huge beer market. So I had a distributor there in that market. That's how the beer got around.
So, and then people drove to your location?
Yep.
What about the alcohol law driving thing? Is that in the US?
It is, yeah. It's it's there. It's 0.8%, which is pretty standard throughout. States for a while had a wide variety of alcohol limits, but now 0.8 has been the typical. And more often than not, people would have a designated driver. And I also started my taproom hours early, so people weren't coming out and getting drunk. So I started at 3 in the afternoon, and I closed at 7.
Oh,
Those were my hours.
that's really early. Yeah.
Very early, yes. Because I didn't want to be a bar. I didn't want to have customers, because I lived upstairs. And, 7 o'clock usually meant I was planning to close at about 8. And I didn't want to be the bar that people hung around and got drunk at, because, again, the liability is very, very high. If they were, I had people I'd say, no, I'm taking your keys, you're staying the night because you've had too much. And so it's something just to be aware of as a proprietor standing behind the bar. You're watching your customers, you're talking to them, making sure that they're not over imbibing.
So it is true that you could have been sued if something
Oh,
happened.
yeah.
Yes.
Very much so. Yeah, I had very high liability insurance for that case. And anybody who serves and sells alcohol has to have that kind of liability protection, because they typically will go back and even though they'll say they were overserved, and without having an alcohol tester to tell me exactly, one person can drink 3 beers and another person can drink beers, and one's drunk and one's barely even buzzed. So you just got to be aware.
So you set up a brand with
Yes.
the Brewfarm, and what would you say? How much was it on your premise, and how much was it by selling in the stores, off premise?
It changed over time. So I brewed my first beer in 2009, and the tap room opened late 2009, and I also started contract brewing in 2009. Actually, before I brewed any beer, I had recipes I developed before, so I started the contract because I wanted to get I used the contract packaging and whatnot to get the Brewfarm name out there. Because when I first started, I said, well, yeah, it's Dave's Brewfarm. I go, what's a Brewfarm? Nobody had
An idea, yeah.
because I made the word up in 1995. So it went very well with packaging up till about 2012, 2013, and then the craft beer market in the United States just exploded. So what was fairly, I hate to say, easy to sell in 2009 and 10 and 11 became extremely difficult in 2012 and 13 because the marketplace was just flooded. They ran out of shelf space, and it became very competitive amongst not only just the brewers but the distributors as well. So the shelf space became a very hot commodity. And so at that point, I quit the contract and packaging and focused solely on taproom, because there's no way I could compete being as small as I am. I didn't have this huge war chest of marketing money to stand out, or even though the beer, did the marketing, it became too competitive.
So you were a bit a victim of the success of the craft beer idea.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's interesting now. Again, looking back, because I was probably one of the smallest breweries in the United States, between volume and just being. I don't know many single operator breweries right now, or even back then. There was maybe less than 3 or 4 of us. So being able to succeed as a small brewer, again, it's about the debt management, it's about the cash flow, and I could do that. I wasn't gonna. I didn't get into the business to get rich, quote unquote. It was, for me, it was lifestyle. I had to make money. That's the business. But I wasn't out to just like suddenly become this multi-billionaire craft brewer in Wilson, Wisconsin. So it was a fantastic, lifestyle and experience to be able to do that, and living out there and brewing whatever I wanted. I think many brewers would be very envious of having that instead of brewing the same beer, because that's their core.
How was the relationship to the other brewers? Because when in Germany, we had something like a break point in the craft beer market. It was in Germany about 2014, 15. Before it was all one loving family, whatever, and then they started to be competitors, and then there were lines between and breaks and whatever, and it started to be more competitive and more not being so friendly anymore. So did you have the same thing in the US?
It was similar. In the area I was, there's probably 6 other small brewers, and they were all small brewers, and I think the competitiveness got to the ones that I'd call the middle tier, making more than, say, 10,000 barrels annually. Most of the ones in my area were probably less than 1,000 barrels annual production. So that there was always competitiveness, but it wasn't to the point where it would ruin the friendship and ruin the partnership. So if I called up somebody and said, "Hey, I need some hops," I'd get hops, and if somebody called me up and said, "Hey, can I get some grain?" Here you go, no problem. So that never went away. But the vision that you spoke of in 2014 may have even been a little earlier. But like I said, 2012, when things really got super flooded in that time period, I heard infighting stories, especially about the breweries in the Minneapolis market. It was much more competitive for the brewers there.
So it started to be harder for you, but you kept on your business. And how did it then develop the next years?
It maintained. I saw a dip in 2012, 13, because all these new breweries. So all people only have X amount of attention, X amount of dollars, X amount of time. So all these new breweries, everyone was going out and trying. But then after about a year or so, I saw stuff pick back up again, because they'd tried these other breweries, and they're like, well, it's not as good as Dave's, so they came back in business, and then it was a pretty steady state up until I sold it, or COVID, I should say.
Yeah. How was let's say the end in whatever you use in asterisks, but how did that come then? That you say, okay, now enough is enough, or was it more or less the pandemic, or what did you leave it?
It's a little complicated. At the time, I was still married, and my ex-wife got a job. She's a college professor, and she got a job in a city 2.5 hours away. So in 2015, we decided we'll sell the Brewfarm, and I'll just move down, which was fine. So we tried to sell the Brewfarm, had a lot of people, ton of interest, but they didn't have what I called the 2 C's, cash and competence. They had one or the other, but you really, to run knowing what I know, you needed both those a lot, because living the dream, it turns out, is really expensive and a hell of a lot of work.
And you wanted it to continue, not just having money, just also having someone to continue your work.
Correct, yeah. I call it a legacy buyer. So the legacy I built from my initial business time with the Brewfarm, I want, because the community that was created by me just brewing beer, but that would come in, was really special. I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but it turned into this thing where people would, I'd say, walk in strangers and they'd walk out friends. And it was in the middle of nowhere, so you really had to make an effort to get out there. It wasn't like you just stop by, because I was literally in the middle of nowhere. So it was a very concerted effort, but again, all these strangers would come together, and then they became regulars, and it was an amazing thing to watch happen. So that legacy was, to me, important, and to the customers also. They were like, well, what's going to happen when you're not there? It's like, I'm hoping that, I'm really looking for a buyer who's going to, take what I built and actually run with it. Because what I called myself a minimalist when it came to what I could do, because it's just me. It ran fine and the cash flowed fine, but that was my kind of somewhat odd business model that I created. So there was so much more potential for events and food and concerts and things of that nature that somebody could do, and thankfully I did eventually end up with a buyer who fit the bill.
So you left before the pandemic?
No. The Brewfarm was for sale, kind of on and off, from about 2015. So the pandemic, the last time I sold a beer was March 8th of 2020.
Oh.
And the state of Wisconsin shut down shortly thereafter, and then everything else unfolded. And I had, like I said, been trying to sell, so it wasn't, the selling of the Brewfarm wasn't caused by the pandemic. It was accelerated by the pandemic, and it kind of changed the dynamics of a potential buyer, because suddenly you're facing a pandemic. It's like, is it viable for me to buy this and try and run a business where we've got the plague knocking on the door? So once that settled down a little bit, I finally, the buyer, Joseph Alton is his name, and I've known him for more than a decade, and it was one of those things where the timing came together at a good time, and he showed interest, and we started talking, and it eventually came down to he bought it, and it was end of October of 21 when it closed.
And what is the name now?
The name now is Botany Brew Farm.
So it's still a brew farm?
It's still a brew farm, yeah. And so, yeah, he's got a lot of good ideas. He's 20 years younger, which is very, very helpful for...
Oh, yes.
Youth and energy are required to run the brew farm. So if I'd been 10 years younger, I never would have sold. Literally. I'm at an age where it's like, I can do all the things, but man, it hurts and it's a lot of work. It takes a lot out of you. So, having youth, it will be very beneficial for him to be successful.
And these 5 years when you decided to sell and could not sell, and your ex-wife had this faraway job, so that must be hard times, I think.
It was not easy, no. I would spend some time before we got divorced. We got divorced, I think, 2017. No, we got divorced in 2019. But things just started going apart in 2017. But I would spend time, because I actually started a master's degree program in 2017, part-time.
For brewing? Or?
No. It was completely different, for leadership.
Oh, okay.
So my ex was teaching at a college called Viterbo University in La Crosse, and they had a business school where they had a leadership program, and I went to numerous lectures and presentations, and it's like, it sounds interesting, and so I started taking coursework and ended up with a master's degree in December of 2019, because you can never stop learning.
No, that's always. So, but then you sold the brew farm, and then you were more or less free.
Completely free. Oh my gosh.
So then you more or less focused on beer judging, or do you also starting something with a leader?
Yes, short answer there. I've been free, except for my puppy dog, my responsibility-wise, since the end of October in 2021. So yeah, I judged quite a bit. I think I mentioned earlier, I did Italy, I did Germany, Japan, and now Brazil for 2022. And I had done brewery consulting in the past prior to the brew farm. I spent time in Vietnam, Italy, Israel on startup breweries. So I haven't pursued actively any startup brewery work, but that's something that I'm looking to next year, because now that it's been a year, it's like, okay, I kind of got the travel bug, because I didn't go anywhere when I was at the brew farm, because if I went somewhere, no beer, no sales, so it was very hard to get away.
So no holiday,
nothing. No. So now I was making up time this year and spending a lot of time on the road. So 2023 looks to be like a take on projects, and the leadership aspect. I haven't quite. I mean, I think there's a lot of brewers that could, use some leadership training and whatnot at all levels, whether it's CEO down or head brewer up or whatever the case may be.
And if you look at the U.S. craft beer, or maybe beer market in general, so when you're working at the brew farm these years, if you have no holiday, you also have no time to see what's happening somewhere else. So if you now look back on that, is there a big change? Is it different now? What do you think what it's about?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. It's matured to the point. I mean, there was a lot of big breweries that expanded just before the pandemic, and there's been a lot of fallout from that. So a lot of places have gone out of business or have very drastically reduced their expansion plans. The market itself, I think craft beer, it's flat right now. I don't think it's not growing because I think people are basing projections on unlimited growth, which is completely unrealistic.
Yes.
So I never understood. We're going to keep on growing at 45% every year till eternity, which doesn't work that way. I know that a lot of brewers took a hit and started producing hard seltzers, the hard seltzer market, but I've heard now that that's going down significantly as well. So things go in phases, and if you chase trends, you're going to be at the whim of trends. And if you brew solid beers, have good people, you should be able to succeed on just being a good brewer instead of having to be a pastry, stout, seltzer, who knows what.
So do you have an idea why we still have rising numbers of breweries in the US?
I think there's a lot of room, I believe, for small brewers.
So local.
Yeah,
ones.
hyper-local. Beer is best fresh at the source, and that's why if a tap room is available, I'll go to a tap room, because that's truly the best expression and best enjoyment is right at the brewery. And again, depending on the business model, they take on just enough debt and can cash flow. Small breweries can be successful very easily. Again, you're not going to if getting rich is your motivation. Opening a brewery is not. It's not the way to do it. There are much better ways to make a lot of money than the craft beer market. So if it's a passion project and you've got a smart business plan or a good brewer and a good brewer and a good brewer, you should be successful. And there's a lot of places that can support a small brewery. If you only have to sell 600 to 1,000 barrels annually, and you have a small town of 30 to 50,000 people, easy to.
Maybe one last thing. Did your view on the big players change? So because when I think on the big players in Germany, maybe 20 years ago, they were all competing. They were trying to destroy the small ones, getting up every hectoliter counts. So and they were very rude on the market. And now some of them understood that if they destroy all the small things, they will lose their identity, and they start to do more cooperations. But on the other hand, more and more small ones are bought by big ones, and then also some are managed in a new way, which then means beers change and also may not be better anymore, whatever. So do you think there has been a change in the States?
The big brewers I respect the brewers themselves. The fact that they can brew that much volume consistently, I've got deep respect for that. As far as business practices, I don't have that much, because they're just going, like you said, squeezing every dollar or euro out of any and every opportunity. So I don't see that having changed. It's kind of deviated in its methodology, whether it's buying small brewers and either changing them significantly or just shutting them down to buying out the competition. They still do that, and I'm quite a skill. And again, they're just motivated by shareholder return. And I wish it was not as greed driven. It was more we're all in this together, and we should all try and grow the market together. And you've got your segment, and we've got our segment, and let's help each other. But that's a fantasy.
I think there's a big difference between the people in the management and the brewers, because also in the big players you have brewers, and they love what they do, and they love their beers, and they are as proud as the others. So
correct, yeah.
I think that's always hard, and also I saw there is some change in the storytelling.
Oh,
because when you see before maybe 2010 or like this, the big players said, okay, we are the big ones, so we more or less don't care about the others, and we have more history, we have more the bigger equipment and the better resources and whatever. So but then I realized that they started to take over the messages of the smaller ones. So let's say AB InBev just found out that they had two founders which were immigrants and which had a personal history and an idea about beer, and it changed how they made it look like. And also nowadays, now they make advertising with windmills and farms, and so all this sustainability comes over. So I think they realize things, but they are more making it up than making it good. So something like that.
It's true. I mean, again, they're trying to take what's become a commodity and then back into a story, whether it's real or imagined. Because they've seen what the storytelling from the craft brewers has done and how that engages consumers. And I never spent a nickel on advertising or marketing. I just put stuff out on my blog or my Facebook page, like I'm open this weekend. So all the people that had my beer became my marketing. I had the marketing team, and it was all word of mouth. And word of mouth advertising and marketing is so powerful, and it's so sticky and so persuasive. And the big guys see that and go, "Wow, I want a piece of that word of mouth marketing." So they try to create this aura of being special, and they pay people to go out and be influencers and say, "Hey, you should try this big brand of beer because it's got this XYZ story," and it doesn't stick because people can see through it. They know authenticity. Sometimes it takes a little bit to see through it, but at the end they'll say, "It's like, well, that's not a good. That's a fake story. It's not, and the beer doesn't support the story."
Yeah, that's it. And maybe last question: do you maybe partly regret that you left that, and how are your ex-customers? Do they still have contact to you and ask for beers or ask for recipes, or is there still a community?
There's no regret, because I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, I guess. And the fact that I ran the Brewfarm for 12 years was actually the longest I've done something. So I created something from nothing, and I'm very proud of that. But it was just time. Nothing lasts forever. I do miss my customers. The Brewfarm community that was created. I miss the people and the contact and hearing their stories and seeing the friendships that developed over the time. I still do hear from customers often. Facebook's been my method for keeping track. I mean, I can't stand Facebook philosophically, but it's a fantastic tool for keeping in touch with friends all around the world. I did brew a collaboration beer recently with Alexander Bazo of Bamberg Brewery. Yeah. And so I just put up a label that he had created for our collaboration called "Why Are You So Hoppy?" and people are like, "Oh, he's brewing again! So there's the chatter that goes on, like it made I miss that kind of excitement that gets generated by when I create something new, and my customers would be like, "Oh, he's got a new beer, we gotta go try it," but you have to go to Brazil to drink it. So that little detail,
like a BAM beer farm. So
yeah.
Great. So thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for having us taking part in your story and hear what it's about. And yeah, all the best for your next time and for the next ideas and businesses.
Well, thank you, Marcus. Appreciate the interview.
BierTalk, der Podcast rund ums Bier. Alle Folgen unter www.biertalk.de.